All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and get started so we can hopefully get through everything today. So a couple of things that we'll talk about before we actually get into the process of the rhetorical analysis. The first thing we'll go over is some extra credit opportunities for this paper. The extra credit will run from today, and it will be over April 1st when your paper is due. So everything will be due April 1st. So we'll go over a few of those extra credit opportunities, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about analysis. So we're going to focus on what analysis is, how you come up with the analysis, and the ways that you do what we call close reading. So we'll talk about those things, and then we're going to talk about the idea of rhetoric. Rhetoric is not a difficult concept, but it sometimes takes us a little bit more time to process the information. So some of you may get analysis and then struggle a little bit with rhetoric. Some of you may get rhetoric but struggle a little bit with analysis. And then we will put those ideas together for the rhetorical analysis. Okay, so the idea of the rhetorical analysis is what we will focus on for your next paper. I'm not going to give you guys the paper assignment until Wednesday because I want you guys to practice with it a little bit first and practice with it as a concept, and then I'll give you guys the paper and give you your options. Remember that next week is spring break, so I have you guys for 2 classes, and then you guys will be on spring break for a week. Over spring break, I have minimized your homework for a couple of reasons. First of all, you need to take a break. You need to really focus on rejuvenating for the next, the long haul that's coming up towards the end. The other part of that is I need a bit of a break. I was explaining to some colleagues, but I was in South Carolina for a conference. It was a big conference. I had to present at the end of the conference. I did a lot of work for the conference. And I haven't slept for a while. It's been way too long. So I actually got sick at the conference, and when I went to the hospital to figure out what was going on, I'm pretty close to having a stroke because I'm like uber stressed out. I do have a wedding coming up, but the wedding is not a big deal. Everything that's going on here is causing more issues. So if you see my eye twitching, that's part of it. So I'm doing everything I can to reduce as much of that as possible, which means that next week I'm going to try to be as unconnected as possible. I'm going to work on getting your grades caught up, getting everything I can done this week as much as possible, and then I'm really going to try to take a break, which is why I've also minimized your homework. So hopefully you won't have any issues and you won't need to call me and be in constant contact. I'm going to take a week off. So if you email me, I probably won't get back to it until that following weekend. So I'm going to take a little time off, okay? So we'll talk about the extra credit first. Just a few opportunities for you. With this paper, it's all about presentation, how things are being presented. So I want you guys to take advantage of some opportunities of watching a presentation, taking in a presentation of some kind. So one of those is the movie, the Hunger Games trilogy. It's not really a trilogy anymore, but they're making it into something more. The Mockingjay is going to be playing tomorrow. It will be, I believe, in the Student Life building. Is that? I'm not quite sure. But it will be playing tomorrow at 6 p.m. If you haven't seen it, it is a good movie. I read the books. I'm not a big fan of her work, but the movies have actually been pretty good. So the movie is really good. If you've been hearing the song played on the radio, it's been playing, 96.5 has been playing it quite a bit. Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's even better in the placement of the movie. So the movie is one option that you guys have. Another option that you guys have, there is an improv group coming. I personally love improv. Improvisation is basically coming up with ideas on the fly. So kind of BSing your way through a situation, which some of us are really good at, right? So I actually did improv when I was in high school on the speech and debate team. I went to state in it. Didn't win state, but I still went to state. It's a really fun. So you go into situations. So the audience may throw up a situation. If you've ever seen Whose Line Is It Anyway, ever played it yourself, it's basically the same concept. So I might say, you're a fly on the wall in a bar. So then you have to act out being a fly on the wall in a bar. So it's a lot of fun. They have a troupe coming, a group of people coming. I'm not quite sure when that is. I was just reading this stuff when I went to the restroom on the Kaleidoscope. So look on the Kaleidoscope and you'll find out more. Also, they're having coffee with the president. So coffee with the president, not Obama, but the president of the campus, Michelle Simmons. Michelle is just one of the nicest people you ever would meet. She's a really, really sweet lady. She's the campus president. She just acquired this position in October. So they're having coffee with the president. It's, I believe that one is March 16th or the 26th. I know there's a 6 in it. And it's at 6 p.m. So again, check the Kaleidoscope for any of those opportunities. If something else comes up that you have to attend or that you're going to, let me know and we can talk about whether it qualifies for extra credit. Yes?
Do we have to do all of those or one of them?
Just one. You only get one extra credit opportunity per paper. So remember that after you go to it, so part of it's going to the event, and then what do you have to do? Write something.
About it.
I want something creative. So this is my opportunity to not have to grade an essay and your opportunity to not have to write an essay. So I want something creative. An example of this, I had a student who wrote a poem about the call to understanding. So he attended the call to understanding and he wrote a poem about it for his extra credit. So if you want to write a poem, if you want to write a short story, if you want to do a comic strip, if you want to do a letter of some kind, whatever it is, just don't make it an essay, please. Okay, any other questions about that? All right, this is where we're going to get into the thick of it, so you will want to take some notes, quite a few notes, and stay very focused. I need to know that you're participating and know that you understand this information. I've already tweaked your assignment, and it's different from Tuesday and Thursday's assignment because they have different needs from you guys. So again, just stay very focused. I need you guys to take some notes over this information. And if you struggle with an idea or concept, because we will be going through it fairly quickly, make sure you write that down, that question down, and then we'll be able to answer those questions. So the first part of this is talking about analysis. So when we're talking about analysis, we're not just talking about relaying the information that's already been given. That's summarizing, that's regurgitating. That's not what we're doing when we're talking about analysis. When we're talking about analysis, we're talking about moving beyond description. So we're not describing the idea, describing the concept. We're actually looking a little bit more at the meaning, and the meaning specifically to the readers. So why do the readers care about this topic? Why do the readers want to know about this topic and this idea? So what is meaningful to them? What matters to the readers? And then why does that matter? Why should they care about it? Why should they think about it? Why is that a consideration for those readers? So again, we're moving beyond the description and we're really focusing on the meaning behind that. So some of us call it reading between the lines. You can draw inferences based on the information. So again, we'll talk just briefly through these ideas with Irma Sonnenberg-Menkel's piece. So if we said that Irma Sonnenberg-Menkel was a wonderful leader, then we would use the evidence from the story to show why we thought she was a great leader. We're not describing her as a leader. We can't just say she was a barracks leader. That is just description. We want to move beyond that and we want to look at the meaning behind it. So maybe we put a judgment on that idea. That's analysis. Maybe we criticize an idea. That's analysis. So it's moving beyond the description, but you have to use the evidence to support your idea. So again, you could say that Menkel was the most horrible person in the Holocaust. Okay, now why? So then you just have to use the support. Now, do you always understand the ideas and the concepts based on the text, based on the piece that you're reading? No. So you have to sometimes supplement that with research. If you have gaps in understanding, then you're going to supplement that information with research. So remember what we did last week when we were looking at the purpose and we were looking at the source and we were looking at all of these areas, and there were gaps. So some of you didn't know a lot about Newsweek back in 1997. So we supplied those gaps. We, meaning your classmates and I, we supplied some of the information from those gaps. So those gaps are the areas that you're going to have to fill in with research. Part of it is making sure that you're using specific details and that you're isolating those specific details. So many of you talked about her Minkle getting sick from the pig. Yes, she got sick because she hadn't eaten for a long time. That's one thing that made her sick. This is also a new substance. She's never probably had pork up to this point because she's Jewish. So if you didn't know those things, in a close reading, you're going to pick up on some of those concepts, some of those ideas. So you have to make sure that you're actually really going into those details. Tisha brought up a good point earlier. We were talking earlier about how Minkle says in her title, I saw Anne Frank die. However, if you actually look at the line, and I didn't pick up on this, she says she slipped into a coma in my arms. So she actually didn't see her die, she saw her go into a coma. She held her while she went into a coma. So she was maybe using that as a more manipulative technique by using the words, I saw her die, instead of saying, I held her while she went into a coma. So another thing that we can pick up on, you have to do a close reading in order to pick up on some of these little intricacies. And in doing that, you usually want to make some annotations. So in doing a close reading, if you have the text in the center, you will want to make some notes off to the side in the margins. You may underline things, you may highlight things, and then make your notes off to the right-hand side. If you have a question about some information, so maybe you come across a word that you don't understand or a concept that you want to learn more about, remember the piece that we read, the woman, Tamar Duke Kohan, the questions we must ask. So remember the idea of the Mashcom watch? If you didn't know what that was, maybe you wanted to research it a little bit more. Maybe you've heard of it, but you didn't really understand the concept. I admitted, when I thought I knew what realpolitik meant, didn't really know what realpolitik meant. So I isolated that word, and then I made a note off to the side that I need to research this a little bit more. So you would want to list your questions maybe on the left-hand side and then make some notes on the right-hand side about the information. The thing about this is that you want to make sure that you're isolating specific, very, very specific examples. So I have a few methods that people have used in the past. So this is one method of annotating. So this student has gone through, they're reading the piece, they're highlighting things in pen, so they're putting brackets around things, they're making notes off to the side, they are circling things, they are making squiggly lines versus more aggressive lines versus red lines. We have red, green, blue in here. So I can see that this person probably has one of those pens that has the different colors at the top and they just slide them down. So this is this person's method of annotating the information. So this person has notes off into the margin. Physical beauty equals moral good thought. This is her idea, the student's idea. This doesn't come directly from the text. Why doesn't this student write what is from the text right over here in the margins? It's right there. So this person has drawn some conclusions over here. These 4 lines equate to this idea, this concept. Over here, not let me think. So that comes from this idea, and this person has drawn some arrows over here. Is it the worst thing ever that she doesn't have the information up here? It's okay because this is her method. This is her method of understanding the information. So it works for this student. This one is really dark, and I apologize for that. This student has decided to highlight things. So I want you guys to be really cautious when you're highlighting things. This student has highlighted in green, pink, yellow, orange and blues. There are 2 different blues there. And this person has a key at the top for herself. What's the problem with highlighting?
It bleeds through the other side.
It bleeds through. Oftentimes when you're highlighting, especially when you're highlighting in a textbook, it will oftentimes bleed through to the other page. You guys are going to be practicing with a piece from the Common Book, which has very thin recyclable material, and recyclable material is great for the environment, but not great when you're doing a close reading and you're trying to highlight. What's the other problem with this? So orange means what? Adverbs. Pink is
Words to define.
okay. So every time you look at a concept, you have to look back at the key. It's not really simple and easy, and it's not really right there. So you have to actually look at what she is doing with the key. Now this document doesn't end here. So what do you think she has to do with the next page? She has to rewrite the entire key on that next page unless she's going to go back and forth, back and forth. She does have some notes for herself off to the side. This is a close literary reading, so she's looking for certain things. She's probably going to isolate her paper around the questions raised, repetition, foreshadowing, words to define, and then those adverbs. Just another method. This is a method I've actually used a lot. In this method, you isolate certain things. So you have the text in the middle, and on one side, you have different colored pieces, as well as the other side. So in this instance, his initial reactions are in the blue, and then the information that connects it to the text is usually in the green, and then the red is just the person's reasoning for that, the person's clarification of that idea. So again, this is just another method. All of these are methods of doing some close reading. And notice that every single one of these people has highlighted something from the text. It's important, again, that we highlight information from the text, that we isolate information and wording from the text. If your text happens to be on a computer screen, you can use this as a PDF, or use a PDF or convert it to a Word document, and then you can start to make some notes in the margins. This is what I did with your papers. So I highlight certain things and then I make comments off to the side. You can also use a highlighter to highlight things. If you have comments, that usually highlights your comment section. You can make circles. If you feel comfortable with computers, this might be the best way for you to go. Most of you will want to do some kind of closer analysis. So you'll want to use this method probably, or this method. Any of these work for annotating the information. Why again are you annotating the information? Okay, it's going to give you a deeper understanding of what you know, what you need to learn about, where your gaps are. So it's deepening your understanding of the material. Good. So the next idea that we'll talk about is the idea of rhetoric. All of these pieces are hyperlinked, so we'll take you directly to those resources. Purdue OWL has a lot to say about rhetoric. All of these places talk a little bit about rhetoric in different ways. So the first one is just a simple definition from thefreedictionary.com. Rhetoric is the art or study of using language effectively and persuasively. So if we were to say that rhetoric is basically using language, this definition talks about using it effectively or persuasively. Using language isn't always persuasive, and this is where I'm going to slightly disagree with this definition. It does not always need to be persuasion. You can give information, and you can use rhetoric. You can use your language effectively. So if you took out and persuasively, I would agree with this. So the art of or study of using language effectively. Now I will say it is an art. It is an art form. So some of you may understand and know that you write, and you write well naturally. So you can write something and it kind of comes out smoothly and the words all fit together. Some of you may not have that innate skill, so you may have to study a little bit more in order to be smooth at this, and in order to be more effective.
Wouldn't effectively technically be persuasively in the sense that if I'm giving you facts about a paper or something like that, I'm not necessarily giving you my opinion, but in turn you have to believe the facts because they're factual. So you're persuading, in a sense, to believe the facts.
Persuasion is very specific, and that's what we're going to look at Aristotle's idea of persuasion. Persuasion is very specific, so that is slightly different. If I'm giving you information, then I'm using the language effectively, but that's not necessarily persuasion. Persuasion's definition is going to be very specific. So when I am persuading, I am trying to get you to come to my side of an argument. So persuasion is slightly different from that. And that's why we're not doing persuasive piece. We're actually doing an argument, which we'll talk about in April. So it's slightly different because persuasion has a very specific purpose in mind. Purdue OWL defines rhetoric as just communication used to modify the perspective of others. And that's kind of your idea. I'm modifying your perspective, so you may not necessarily agree with me, but you can see my points as valid, or I'm trying to get you to understand information. And that's kind of where those facts come in. If I'm just giving you a bunch of facts, I'm giving you information, just like the summary and response. If you did an effective job, you maybe have modified my perspective. Remember one of those questions on the peer review, do you feel like you know this person better because of their responses? So that's a modification of perspective. So this is great, but it doesn't include that it's an art or a study, and I kind of think that's important. So the idea here came from Aristotle, and Aristotle coined this idea of rhetoric. Basically, he said, people are persuading others, and how are they doing it? So he talks about it as the ability to see and identify means of persuasion. So when some information is presented, whether it's written or actually spoken, when the information is presented, is the author being effective in modifying the perspective of the audience? So if we were to take all of these ideas and put them together into a really comprehensive definition, rhetoric is really the art or the study of using language effectively to modify the perspective of the audience. So when we're talking about a rhetorical analysis, we're taking this idea of rhetoric, and this is really the how, and then we're using the analysis to go into more details. To explore the idea more fully. So who does the rhetorical analysis focus on? Based on this definition and your understanding so far, who does the rhetorical analysis focus on? Okay. The audience is a huge part of that. So we have to understand the audience to understand what kind of information they're going to be receptive to. We need to know what the audience needs to know, and we need to know how the audience is going to best take the information in. So I presented at a summit on Saturday in front of a bunch of peers, and I already knew going in that it was going to be a hostile group. So I was prepared. I had done my homework. I used language that would be appealing to them because I knew that they were going to be hostile. Still got hostility, still got attitude, but nobody threw tomatoes, so it was good. So audience is a huge component here. What else do we have to be aware of? What else are we thinking about? Who else's perspective are we looking at?
Piece that you're, I guess, the piece that you're writing over.
Okay, not as writers yet. You are just looking at something But you have to pay attention to the audience, and who else do you have to pay attention to?
Readers.
That's the audience. Who else?
Yourself.
Okay, not us as observers, because really we're observers in all of this. We're looking at this, how this plays out. But when I was telling you about my hostile environment, who else was part of that consideration? Not just the audience, but me.
You.
The author. So we always have to consider the author and then the audience. So with this idea, and again, there are hyperlinks here that will take you guys to information. This last one is my favorite of these, and if we weren't always so short on time, I would go through it. It talks about rhetorical, the triangle and appeals. It's a nice little video. It goes through some examples. It goes through different pieces. And I have a lot of hyperlinks here, so you guys will want to review these. So again, the idea of rhetoric is how it's presented and not what is presented. So we're not looking at the content for anything more than how does the author use that information to persuade or modify the perspective of his or her audience. So let me say that again. So the idea of rhetoric is looking at how the author uses the language to modify that perspective for the audience. So it's looking at how did I use my language to not make the audience mad or madder than they were already going to be. How did I use my language effectively to decrease that hostility? So I have to really look at the audience. And I also have to look at what I'm doing in order to make sure that we can modify their perspective. Questions so far? Again, and I will say this probably every class session, you are not looking at what is being said. This is not a summary or a response. This is an analysis of how the author persuades or modifies the perspective of the audience. Now, part of that is looking at some of the information. So when we talk about the rhetorical situation, we already said the audience is a key component of that. So when I'm teaching English, am I teaching you guys the same way I'm teaching when I taught 6th grade? No. I have to change and I have to adjust for my audience. I have to make sure that my audience has some background information. I will tell you, Saturday, I knew I was speaking to a group of very hostile reading instructors, so I made sure that I used language that would reflect our education. So I talked about things like decoding and language acquisition and syntax placement. And one of my colleagues is a writing person, so she's like, what the hell are you talking about? I don't understand these words. Like, yeah, I know you don't understand them, but they understand them. And it's important that we understand what the audience knows and what the audience doesn't know. So we need to understand who the audience is. The other part of this is the author. So we need to know and understand a little bit more about who the author is and why the author has chosen that topic, maybe why the author has chosen what the person is writing about. We also need to know a little bit more about the context. So this is not the content, again, this is the context of the situation. So we need to be able to understand the author's main idea. So again, how do we get main idea? It's the topic plus what?
The supporting details.
We use the supporting details to figure out
Main idea.
Correct.
the author's direction. So it's the topic and where the author's going. Some of these pieces you're going to hear it outright, but some of these pieces that you're going to have the option of choosing, you're going to have to figure it out. It's what we call implied main idea. So with implied main idea, you use the supporting details, you use the supporting ideas, and you come up with what the author's trying to say about that topic. You also look at things like medium and genre. So if you see an advertisement, the way that that is presented is going to be slightly different from an essay. So when we're looking at medium, the medium is how it's transmitted to you. You guys are going to be working with videos. So your options for the rhetorical analysis are all videos. Your options for your rhetorical analysis, the medium is always a video for all of them. You should write that down. That's why I say it like 3 times. That will be in your paper.
What'd you say? Right.
The medium of your options for the rhetorical analysis, they're all videos. Now the genre is going to be a bit more specific into the type of video. So if we talk about music, the medium is music, and then the genre might be country or pop country or rap or maybe we have classic rock or hard metal, or we have the different more very, very specific pieces. And your genres are going to be different. The other part of this that we have to understand is a little bit more about the culture. Now the culture is kind of this broad idea, but we need to understand the culture of the author, the culture of the audience, and the cultures that are discussed within the piece. So again, in my presentation this weekend, I was presenting with others, and one of the people I was presenting with, it has a composition background, so rep comp. So she didn't understand the reading stuff that I was saying. There was another person who is a reading specialist I was presenting with, so she understood the reading stuff, but she didn't understand the comp stuff, the composition stuff. So I was kind of in the middle, because my background is in both of those things. So I was kind of the one that fielded the questions whenever somebody had a question. I was talking to a bunch of developmental educators as a developmental educator, talking about developmental students. So we all had this common understanding. Now, if there had been someone in there who had no idea, there were several of the employees of the center that we were at, they kept coming in going, and just giving us faces because they didn't have the same background understanding, the same knowledge. So the culture is kind of this broad idea when we're talking about different ethnicities, we're talking about different ages, we're talking about different genders, we're maybe talking about different educational levels. It's a very general understanding of the culture of the audience, the culture of the author, and the culture of the piece, the culture as described in the piece. Because what you're using, it has a global focus on it, you guys will be researching and you'll be looking at cultures that are different from your own. So we're not looking at pieces that are American based. We're looking at pieces, one option is from Jamaica. So it talks about Jamaica and what's going on in Jamaica. One option is from, I think it's from Pakistan. So what's going on in Pakistan, what's going on with other cultures there. One of those is a piece from Syria, so it's what's going on in Syria right now. You have to understand a bit more about the culture in order to understand what the piece is trying to say. In those 3 instances, all of the authors are part of the culture that they're talking about. In those 3 instances, all of the authors are talking to an audience who is not part of that culture. So this gets a little bit more difficult. Now you're surrounding all of these ideas around the author's purpose. So the purpose and the main idea are slightly different. The purpose is really what the author is trying to do. The main idea is what the author is presenting. So it's what the author is presenting. The purpose is why the author is presenting. All right. So I'm starting to see that you're getting a little bit lost. And again, this is a difficult concept. This is a harder piece. So what questions do you have so far? Anybody have questions about analysis? Anybody have questions about rhetoric? Because I'm going to add a layer to this. So if you have questions, we should field those now. So rhetoric is, again, how something is presented, and we have to consider the author, how the author is presenting the information, why the author is presenting in that way, and the audience. What is the audience going to be receptive to? What information does the audience need to know? Why has the author maybe supplied the information there? And then when we're looking at the context part of that, we're looking at the author's main idea, how it's presented, and then the culture. So the culture can include what components? Age, educational level.
Religion.
It can include religion. We didn't talk about that, but it can include religion as well. Good. So age, religion. Did we say, what else did we say? Gender, educational level, ethnicity. All of these are components of culture. So we have to understand the culture of who? The audience and the author, and any cultural elements that are presented within the piece. Good. Yes?
Now, if they write over a certain area, does that mean that's the origin, or is the origin different from that sometimes? Like, we're writing over Syria, would that be the origin of the paper, or would the paper have a different origin?
The paper has a different origin because, and this is where the medium and the genre are going to come into impact. So all of these pieces are videos, but they're videos presented either from PBS or from TED Talks. So TED Talks are a specific subculture, and then PBS viewers are a different subculture. So when we're talking about the culture, even though it may be about Syrian culture, the audience for that is not Syrians. I think they speak Arabic, but they're not. The whole piece is in English. Well, not the whole piece. There are clips of it that aren't. So the audience is going to be slightly different. So the origin is not going to be the same as the culture of the context, the audience, and the author. Any other questions yet? If you're feeling lost, we need to back up a little bit. So let me put this into context for you guys. So if we were looking at Irma Sonnenberg-Menkel's piece, we're going to look at Irma Sonnenberg-Menkel herself. We're going to analyze Irma Sonnenberg-Menkel. We're going to look at the audience. So who is the audience of Irma Sonnenberg-Menkel's piece? Okay, educated Americans. That's the analysis part. And then we're going to use that they were from Newsweek in 1997. We're going to use all of that support to prove how we know that information about the audience. The context of the piece, her main idea was sharing stories. So she was trying to get people to share their stories.
That would be I thought that would have been the purpose.
That her purpose is to persuade others to share their stories. So notice the difference in the language there. Her purpose is to persuade others to share their stories. Her main idea was sharing stories helps relieve the pressure. What was that last line that she said? Do any of you remember? It helps. It helps. So her main idea would be that sharing stories helps. Slightly different in the wording from the purpose. So the medium would be, it was a news article. And the genre is going to be that it was a Newsweek news article. So how is that different?
Okay, showing the credibility of Newsweek.
Okay, it dives a little bit more into that credibility of Newsweek. It's not a Kokomo Tribune article. It's not a USA Today article. It's not a New York Times article. It's not a People Magazine article. It's a Newsweek article. So that's going to give us something more specific. We could even go a little bit deeper and say that it was a Newsweek lifestyle article. So it's not like deeply steeped in current contemporary events. It's a lifestyle article meant to evoke emotion. Good. And then culture. What were some of the cultural aspects that we need to understand in order to understand the story a bit more deeply? What were some of the cultures presented?
The age.
Okay, she talks about different ages. So she talks about Anne Frank's age. She talks about her age at 100. So we have a 15-year-old, we have a 100-year-old, and then she talks a little bit about the commandant's story, and the commandant was probably middle-aged somewhere. Okay, age, what else?
Gender.
Gender. Why is it important that she was a female?
Because of the role that she played.
Okay, the role that she played as a female barracks leader would have been different if she had been a male barracks leader. And we can start to make some assumptions based on that. It also helps us identify her motherly instincts, and some of you talked about that in your papers, talked about her motherly instincts kicking in. Good. What else?
Educational level.
Okay. We could talk a little bit about educational level. There's not a lot in there about educational level, but we can assume that she wasn't very well educated. Okay?
She's Jewish.
Jewish. That's the religious aspect. So we need to bring that up. That helps us bring up a deeper area, a deeper aspect of that. Where did she live? Germany. So the German culture is going to be one that's different as well. She traveled to Holland. We don't hear a lot about the Holland aspect of her life. So we can go into some detail, or maybe we research that a bit to figure out if there's a connection there, or if there's something that we need to isolate a bit more.
Where did you say she lived at now?
She went to Holland.
Oh,
Yeah.
get her daughter.
She left her daughter there, and then they had initially gone to Holland as well.
4 years. And then they was transferred.
Yep, and then they were transferred back. Good. Okay. So we look at all of these areas, we look at all of the situation, and we look at the context of the situation. So I just drew this out so we could go into a little bit more detail about this. But the author, audience, and context are the areas that you're going to focus on with the rhetorical analysis. Now, the reason that you're looking at these things is to determine if the author is effective or ineffective in his or her use of the language. And that's where we get into the rhetorical appeals. Now again, you have some videos hyperlinked here. So the first word, the word of rhetorical, this is like a more contemporary video. It goes over contemporary leaders. The APP here has one video. This is the Change My Mind series from PBS. So any of you who grew up with me in the 80s who used to have this, Change My Mind, they have a theme song and everything. It's so cheesy and cool. So this talks about it. And then the last part is one that I actually like a lot better. And I think you'll understand why. So we're going to listen to this, hopefully.
You're watching Persuasive Appeals, Ethos, Logos, and Pathos by Bruce Goodner. This is Ari. Ari has an idea. He'd like to order pizza for dinner tonight, but there could be a problem. This is Ari's mom. She may or may not order the pizza. She's got the phone and the money. Hey Mom, can we order pizza tonight? I don't know. Ari knows that there must be some way to get his mom to agree with him and order that pizza. And he knows exactly what he'll do. He'll use persuasion. But how will Ari persuade his mom to order that pizza? Well, a long time ago in ancient Greece, a philosopher named Aristotle noticed that when people try to persuade each other, they use 3 main tactics. He called these tactics ethos, logos, and pathos. The first one, ethos, or ethical appeal, is about establishing your credibility with the audience.
So again, ethos is going to be credibility. So ethos is the credibility. Now, how do we trust, what kind of things do we trust in when we're talking about having faith in someone or having faith in information. We trust in people who have,
Can you spell that? Ethos? Education.
ETHOS.
we trust in people who have an education of some kind. So oftentimes we look at people's background education, we look at their credentials. Again, I was with a bunch of educators who I wanted to punch like 50 million of them in the face. And they talked about their PhD is better than someone with an EDD, and they should be called a doctor, and this person should. Shut up. You all have education, you all have worth, except some of you that I want to punch in the face. So they were talking about their education, and they trusted in each other because of their education. I was using language that was from my education because I knew that would appeal to those certain people. But do we always just trust in education? What else do we trust in?
Back.
Okay, we look at experience. So we look at the experience of the individual, and we'll talk about the facts and the content stuff here in just a bit. So we want to trust in people who have experiences. We want to trust in people who have experiences and an education most of the time, but there are times that one trumps the other. What's an area that experience may trump the person's education? When might you trust someone who has experience over someone who has an education?
Alligator
Oh,
wrestling.
they know
Okay,
what they're doing.
alligator wrestling. I would prefer someone who has experience with alligator wrestling to get the alligator away from me. Good. And we say this and giggle about it, but it's the truth. I went on a cruise a few years ago, and we went snorkeling. I don't care what kind of, I don't even care what language the people were speaking in. We were in Belize, and they were the most beautiful, amazing people ever. And they were wonderful. But I don't care if they had an education. I don't care if they had a certificate. I didn't ask them, can I see your certificate? I wanted to know that they could save my life when I was drowning. And I did. I drowned, I drank the ocean, threw up in the ocean, gave it back, all that. It was gross. We went parasailing, and I swear those were the two most stoned out of their mind individuals I've ever met in my entire life. But they gave us confidence in their experiences.
Parasailing, is that?
That's when you fly 400 feet in the air over the ocean, and it was gorgeous.
With a kite thing?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, my.
Yep.
I want to do that.
It was crazy fun, but I didn't ask these two guys to show me your license. I trusted in their experiences, and we went first, because I probably wouldn't have trusted them after us. They were a lot of fun. They had their issues, but they were a lot of fun. We got the camera back, and it was like pictures of them going like this. Like, you didn't take any pictures of us in the air,
Are you
jerks.
serious?
They had like 4 pictures of us in the air, and that was it. So sometimes we trust in people who have experience over people who have education. Those of us who are parents, we probably trust our kids to people who have kids or people who have had kids. Nate is going to be a dad, so he's probably not going to people and saying, you know, hey, I know you don't have any kids. Do you have any advice on this dad stuff? No. And he's probably being very picky about people who have experiences with that dad stuff, because there are certain people that you trust in their experiences and their level of expertise. So you want to be very cautious and very aware of the use of credibility. So let's continue with this and see how Ari does it. Why do you think I like this video?
Pizza.
Yeah, that's the biggest reason. Deals with children and parents, but yeah, it deals with pizza
An
too.
author or speaker establishes credibility with the audience by being fair, being knowledgeable about the topic, being trustworthy, and being considerate of their thoughts and opinions. Let's look at how ethos or credibility helps Ari with his mom. Hey Mom, I know you're tired, and so you probably don't want to cook, so I have an idea. Let's order some pizza. You can choose any kind of topping you want, and I have a coupon. Now Ari's mom is probably thinking, hey, that's a pretty fair request. Pizza's pretty easy to order, and I haven't cooked anything yet. She's also thinking, you know, Ari knows a lot about pizza and the toppings. Maybe he can help me pick one. She's also thinking that, hey, Ari's not going to get out of doing his homework or his chores if I order the pizza, so he's definitely not trying to trick me. And she knows that Ari thought about her, that she is tired, and she would probably like to take a night off from cooking, and it doesn't hurt that she can save a couple of bucks too. Because Ari established credibility or ethos with his mom, she's probably going to think, hey, pizza's not a bad idea.
So again, he may have adjusted his wording slightly and not said, hey mom, I know you're tired, but hey mom, this would be a great opportunity for us to spend a little bit more time together. So the idea of ethos is using the language effectively. Is the author establishing that credibility with the author or with the audience? So how is the audience receiving that information as well? I have one kid, he's not very nice. So he does this to me just about every day. Mom, we got a pizza and you look tired. I look tired? No. Don't tell me I look tired, because that's basically saying you look horrible. So you want to order pizza. So you want to be very cautious with the language that you're using as an author, but you also want to be aware of even those little intricacies there and how the author is presenting it.
Logos, or logical appeals, have to do with being reasonable. When your idea or argument is reasonable, it means you put a lot of thought into it, and that there are good reasons to think the way you do, and that there's evidence to support what you say.
Okay, this is where we want to start looking at the content a little bit more, and we want to look at to make sure that there is deeper thought into it, but also that there's good evidence provided. We want to look at those facts and the information that's provided and make sure that it makes sense, but also that it's not offensive. It's deeper in the thinking, it's deeper analysis instead of just a presentation of information. And that the information is presented is actually good. So oftentimes with logos, we think of being logical. So logic, reasoning. But what is logical for me is not necessarily logical for the next person. The pieces that you're dealing with deal with logos in other countries. So when things occur in other countries, we're going to have some gaps because we're not necessarily going to understand all of the cultural aspects of the reasoning behind why things are done the way they're done, or why things are presented in the way they're presented. So there are cultural aspects that we have to be considerate of, and this is the area that will probably need to be researched, or this will be what you need to use your research on.
And that there's evidence to support what you say. Let's look at how logos, or logical appeal, helps Ari. Hey Mom, let's order some pizza tonight. It's got a lot of healthy stuff. In fact, I read somewhere that all the major food groups are in pizza. Now, Ari's mom is probably thinking that Ari is very thoughtful. He had some good reasons for me to order the pizza. And I especially like the food pyramid. That was really good evidence. Maybe I should order a pizza for dinner. The last kind of appeal, pathos, is an appeal to emotions. It's all about feelings. If you want someone to agree with you, you probably want them to have a positive feeling towards you. You usually can't convince anyone who's mad. So a speaker needs to make sure that the audience feels the same way she does, whether or not they agree with the actual topic. So that way, because they feel the same, they're more likely to agree with her later on.
Okay, so again with pathos, when we're dealing with pathos, we're dealing with the emotions and the feelings that transpire here. So we're dealing with the feelings and the emotions. Now with the feelings and the emotions, we're not just talking necessarily about positive or negatives, we're talking about the details that are involved as well. So when information is presented, if it's presented in a certain way, it can be considered offensive. So that brings in a negative pathos. So the information there may be that one word when my son says, "You look tired." They'll look tired. If he said, "You're probably tired because you've been at work for a long time today," but it's that one word that now triggers an emotion. So we have to make sure that whether those emotions are positive or negative, whether those emotions are specific to different feelings, whether those are tied to specific words, we want to be aware of those emotions that are presented as well.
Actual topic. So that way, because they feel the same, they're more likely to agree with her later on. Look how it works for Ari. Mom, you know what I love? I love pizza. And you know why I love pizza? Because it makes me happy. And Ari's mom gets to thinking, hey, I like pizza too, and it makes me happy, and it would make Ari happy too. Maybe I should order pizza for dinner. You're probably thinking that ethos, logos, and pathos are supposed to be used separately. However, it's actually best whenever you use all three together. When you establish your credibility, have good reasons with evidence, and help the audience feel the same way you do, you're sure to make your case. Whether you're the speaker or the audience, it always helps to know how people get their ideas across. If you're the speaker or author, understanding the persuasive appeals gives you a toolbox on how to persuade people. Think of them as guidelines when it's your job to change people's minds. And if you're the audience, it's helpful to understand these persuasive appeals, so that way you'll know when someone is trying to use these tools on you. And it'll make one Greek philosopher pretty happy.
So right now, you guys are going to be in one of two positions. So you are going to either be part of the audience, so you are one of the intended observers of the piece, or you're going to be an outside observer. You are not the author yet. That's the next essay where you will be arguing for your paper. So you're going to be using these later on, but right now you're going to be looking at them and how authors use them effectively. So the next part of this is understanding the idea of ethos, logos, and pathos. So authors use these techniques, these appeals, to persuade their readers. So were there any instances where Irma Sonnenberg-Menkel uses credibility?
She's 100 years old.
Okay. Her age implies a certain amount of experience in life, and she tells her story that she lived through. So there is an experience level there. She also brings up Anne Frank. And Anne Frank is somebody whose experience we maybe trust in as well. So there is an amount of credibility that is established there because of who she uses and because of her own experiences. She doesn't have the education, but we trust in her experience and the experience of those who she talks about in her piece. Good. Is there any logic in what's going on in her piece, in her presentation of her piece?
Well, we had talked about it before, how she talks about the bad, but right when it gets to where it's getting bad, she kind of brings something up that lightens it up a little bit.
Perfect. So every other paragraph, she actually alternates between something that really details some of the events and some of the intricacies of the events, the horrendous events at that, and then the next paragraph, she lightens it up with something positive. So she gives something negative, something positive, something negative, something positive. Good. There are other cultural aspects that we have to be aware of, and we talked before about how with the pig, if you didn't know that she was Jewish and you didn't understand that Jewish people don't typically eat pork, then that's something that you wouldn't have necessarily understood why the levels of why they got so sick, and why it was so important for her to bring that up. Maybe you don't understand Anne Frank's story, so you don't understand how her story actually parallels a lot of Anne Frank's story. So that would be an area that many of you would want to research. Pathos, is there any emotional part to the story?
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of the whole story. The whole story relies on pathos. So Irma Sonnenberg-Menkel's story doesn't rely as much on ethos or logos. It relies mostly on pathos. Why is that dangerous?
Because it's just one, and it can just be hurt feelings. I mean, you might not feel the same.
Good. Everybody's going to react to things slightly differently. Like when my son says, "You look tired," my other kids are going, "Yeah, she does look tired." And I'm going, "You say I look horrible." Like, I'm feeling a different emotion than they are, and then Mike is. So everybody's feeling a different emotion. So when you rely on emotion as an author, that's very dangerous, because people have different experiences in their own lives that will generate different emotions. People are going to read differently into things, and that's really dangerous to just rely on emotions. Which one of these is the best to rely on?
For experience.
Okay. When we're talking about logos, it's really difficult for everybody to have the same idea. If we're in the same culture, we have a general idea of what's right and what's wrong. But what's right is not always just black and white. So how many of you know about Les Mis? You know the piece? Okay. So the idea of Les Mis, a man steals bread. So,
He goes to prison for very
hold on. He steals bread. He broke the law. He should go to jail. He should go to prison. But he was stealing bread to feed his family. So is it really just black and white, or are there other gray areas? Yes, he broke the law. He goes to prison. He's for a very long time. But should he have? He's trying to feed his family. So everybody's definition of what's right and wrong is not always the same. So we have to be really careful with the use of logos as well. We have to make sure it's very clear, and there's a use of deductive reasoning. So deductive reasoning is kind of what you guys have been doing with that claim, evidence, and reasoning format. This reasoning gives deductive reasoning. So it clarifies ideas. So there's no question about those ideas and how they're presented. Ethos is the one that we, as educated people, we are going to start trusting in more. So you want to make sure that when you're presenting information, the authors that you're using have an amount of credibility, mostly through education, but also sometimes through experiences. So we're going to start trusting in ethos more than anything else, because the different cultures have the different sense of what's right and what's wrong. In Canada, they think we're all a mess in America. I have to agree with some of their points. So they do, yes. They think that our systems are not as effective. So what's right for us is not necessarily right in Canada. What's right for us in Indiana is not necessarily what's right for someone in Ohio. So every place is going to be different, and everybody's sense of logic and the reasoning is going to be slightly different as well. So you just kind of have to be aware of all of those things and be cautious with all of those appeals. Now, each of these hyperlinks will take you to a website. It's the same website, it's just the different areas of ethos, logos, and pathos. And again, you have a few more videos here that will take you to videos about rhetorical appeals. So again, when we're talking about the rhetorical analysis, you're looking at the features of a piece. So you have to identify, is there an argument? What is the author's purpose? You always want to look for the author's purpose first. So you always want to figure out, what is the author trying to do? Are they trying to persuade me, inform me, or entertain me?
What if they trying to do all of them?
If they're trying to do all of them, persuasion is usually the one that comes out most prevalent. So that's the one that we want to focus on. If you have all three of those appeals, usually persuasion is the one that we focus on. So just like with Irma Sonnenberg-Minkel's piece, she's giving us information. She's sharing her emotional story. So she is informing and entertaining, but persuasion is the key purpose there. The next step is looking at the features of the piece. So this is where you're looking at the author, you're looking at the audience, and you're looking at the context. Remember, it's context, not content. So you're looking at the culture, you're looking at how it's presented, and you're looking at the author's main idea. So you use this information to determine the appeal of those features. So you're going to determine the appeal of the author. Is the author credible? Is the author using logic? Or is the author using emotion? You're going to look at the audience. What kind of credibility does the audience have? What kind of logic is the audience going to believe in? What kind of emotion is the audience going to connect to? And you're looking at the context. So how does the information establish credibility? How does the information establish logic? How does the information establish emotion? Does it have to have all three?
No, but it's best.
It works best when it has all three, but oftentimes it's going to have one or the other, but it's not always going to have three. So for your analysis, you use all of this information to describe the effectiveness or the ineffectiveness of the author. So is the author effective or ineffective in persuading the audience to believe whatever it is? And that's where you're going to go into the different areas and the appeals that are used in each of those areas. So there are a few steps to this. First of all, you want to really read the piece thoroughly. This reading of the piece is where you want to make sure you're annotating. Why do you think it's so important to annotate?
Understand what you're reading. So you gotta fully understand
You want to look at those intricacies. You want to look at those little details. There may be a word. Again, you look tired versus you must be tired. That little word is one of those little details. So you want to take notes of these things. You want to make sure that you're reading into the piece. You're not just reading and glossing over. You want to really read deeply into the piece. And by read deeply, I mean review it. The practice assignment for you guys is actually going to be a piece that's from the Common Book, so you're going to read it. You're actually going to physically read it. The assignment that you will have will be reviewing a video. So you're going to watch a video. So you're not going to actually read it unless you're reading the transcript. So you're going to review the piece thoroughly so you can really dive deep into the piece itself and determine the purpose of the piece. So you're going to determine the purpose of the piece. To make this easier, I have given you all persuasive pieces, persuasive options. So all of the pieces that you have are persuasive. You just have to determine what is the author trying to persuade the readers or the viewers to understand or do. So you're going to make some determinations about the author, and you're going to decide what evidence that you have that supports that idea. So if you have that the author is a strong person, explain with the evidence from the piece. You're going to make some determinations about the audience. So you're going to decide what you know about the audience. Again, this is analysis. So you're going to say that they're educated whoever's, or one group is Canadian. So they're very affluent Canadians. One group is Americans, educated Americans. So you're going to use the evidence from the piece that supports that idea. You're going to look at the context. So remember the context. You have main idea, you have the genre and the medium, and then you have the culture. So those things that are presented. So you're going to make some determinations. So maybe you say something about how the Jewish culture, Minkel was forced out of her Jewish culture because of her situation. Maybe that's your analysis. And then you use evidence to provide that. You're also going to look at the appeals. So you're going to look at the ethos, logos, and pathos and how those are presented. Now, as I explained before, there may be gaps. So you may not understand everything. So you may have to research. If you don't understand the intricacies of the cultural aspect, you should research that. And that is why I'm not as concerned with you guys as I am my Tuesday afternoon class. I want you guys to choose pieces for the assignment, and I'll repeat this again on Wednesday. I want you to choose pieces that are part of a culture that you don't necessarily know a lot about. So I have a few students who think they know everything about Syria. One specifically thinks he knows everything about everything. So I don't want them to choose the piece on Syria. They are recently back from the war. They've had several tours of duty. So they think they know a lot about what has gone on, what has transpired. So there are two pieces that they will not be allowed to choose because of those experiences. Last semester when I was teaching in Logansport, I had a student who was from Jamaica, so he couldn't choose that piece. So you're going to choose pieces that go against your culture because that will be an area that you can actually research. You're going to determine the gaps that exist in your understanding so you can research those. And then that information will help you determine whether the author is effective or ineffective. So I have a few practice activities that we're not going to be able to get to. This one, if you click on the hyperlink, it goes through the Obama poster. This is the Ben McCorkle series. It's really cool. And as you look, you see these circles. When you click on the circles, it goes into really looking deeply at certain aspects of analysis. And it's analysis of the way it's presented. I also have this practice. So really quickly, what is the purpose of this advertisement? Okay, let's get really close into the language here. So the purpose is to persuade viewers to buy this watch, buy the Tag Heuer watch. So who is the author? Tag Heuer. Do you know anything about Tag Heuer? Okay. Most of you will probably say no. And a few years ago, I thought everybody would say no like they usually do. And I had a student who actually bought the Tag Heuer watch for her husband. And I was like, really? And they are very expensive. Like the watch she bought her husband was $850.
Yeah, you can get them at Walmart's or Auto.
Okay, so they're very expensive watches. If you didn't know that, that would be something that you would want to research a little bit more. Now, who is the audience?
People who really want the watch.
Okay, let's get more specific.
Well educated
Brian?
people.
Okay, so go into more detail here. Go into more detail. Okay, Courtney says men. Okay, and why do you say men?
It's got Brad Pitt on it, and it's a man's watch.
Okay, so a male icon, and it's male watch. Anybody say women?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and why?
Because it's Brad Pitt.
Because it's Brad Pitt.
And they will want it for their man.
Okay, and maybe they want it for to buy for their husband, their man, whoever. So neither one of those is wrong, just different perspectives. You could say both. It's to sell to both men and women, and these are the reasons why. Good. What about this one? So who is the audience here?
Women.
Women?
Lots of
Why?
Men and women.
Okay, again, maybe women who want to be like her, maybe women who know the Dior name, maybe men who are attracted to her. So everybody is going to provide evidence as to why they think or feel the way that they do. So you guys are going to read The Right to Be Fully American in your common book. So it's by Yasir Ballou. You can look at your table of contents and find out what page it's
And what
on.
book, Miss?
In that common book, this I believe.
Oh, okay.
And then you guys are going to answer some questions. Now, keep in mind that this is one of those in-class activities, so you have to be here in order to do the second part of this. So I'm giving you the first part of it, and we'll finish it in class on Wednesday. This is a mini analysis. We have one extra. This is a mini analysis, and there are going to be some areas that you don't have the information for. Based on the evidence and based on what you have in the story, there will be some gaps. So all I want you to do is put a note, an asterisk, next to the areas that you need to research. Don't do the research. Don't research the information. Just make a note on areas that you may need to research. So answer the questions, go through these ideas, these concepts, based on The Right to Be Fully American by Yasir Ballou.
You got the page number on it?
No, you can look in your book. Look in your book. You guys can find that. Yasir Ballou is the author. Think about who the audience is. So you're going to have to do a lot of thinking about the audience. And you're going to answer these questions directly on here. I will post this to Blackboard, so for those of you who want to type it, you can type it in there. You can expand it as much as you want to. Just make sure that you have a printed copy on Wednesday when you come in. I will see you guys Wednesday.
Sorry, the book.